Well, hello there, ladies and gents. I'm Hatz, your friendly neighborhood hat man. So, something of a change in direction here. It was suggested that maybe I should look at some content from the reality TV world, which does kind of tick the box in wanting to refer back to more current events type commentary, which I used to do oh so long ago. It was also suggested, and y'all can thank my special lady Emma, that Gypsy Rose Blanchard might be the ideal topic to begin with. And I agree, in part because she's become quite infamous over the years and is now trying to shill that infamy towards more genuine fame. Not a bad shtick for a murderer. Someone should tell a Drastia that. So here's what we're gonna do. Since I don't know much about her really beyond the bullet points of her early life issues and subsequently ending up going to jail for killing her mom, this is going to be something of a learning curve for me and hopefully a source of entertainment for you. Because let's face it, when it comes to commentary and reactions to things, I'm irreverent, sarcastic, and frequently a colossal dick. Now, I was going to start off with her foray into reality TV via the Life After Lockup series, but then I realized on seeing the first episode that that was effectively a sequel to her Prison Confessions series. So, before even beginning, I'm going to have to take a hard left and go back to that first show before I can even get onto her emergence back into the freedoms of the real world. I mean, it's either that or I could attempt to wing it without really having a lot of the background behind me and just the snippets I've stumbled upon without ever really giving much of my attention over this bitch. So, I ask you to please stick around and let's find out together what happens between Hatz and Gypsy Rose, which sounds like some kind of oddball sitcom. Oh, and one more thing, it seems a lot of this took place in Louisiana. Maybe it's something in the water. Right, Barb?
Have a seat. Grab the mic. Do you know how to do this?
Yes.
All right.
Just sit back. How are you?
Good. How are you feeling today?
Nervous. Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, so she doesn't look anything out of the ordinary. Without any context or backstory, you'd think she was some frumpy 30-something who was in jail for shoplifting or some other crime that doesn't seem like it involves too much of getting your hands dirty. But then I guess she did manage to commit murder without actually getting her hands dirty, so I'm not sure what point I was trying to make there. Oh yeah, that she doesn't look like a psycho crazy bitch. At least not on camera. Yet. Maybe that'll change. I don't know, this is my first time watching these.
I remember my mom said happy endings are not just in fairy tales, they're real. My mother controlled everything I did. I was forced to use a wheelchair. She started telling people that I had cancer. But none of it was true. There was also a lot of emotional and physical abuse. I started to feel like it was either her or me.
Oh, well, it was definitely you when it came down to it, wasn't it? Abbreviated flashback to set the scene for the kid tormented for years by a deranged mom with Munchausen's by proxy. And setting aside whatever else might have come up in the course of this, the existing knowledge I do have is that mom, in name only, was a colossal twat. Like, literally, colossal. There's plenty of horror stories of parents doing all manner of abusive crap to their kids, too frequently with the kid not surviving, and might that have been something that would have happened to Gypsy Rose if things had continued a little bit longer? Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, when she got the chance, she sure as hell took care of it.
Dee Blanchard's death was violent.
And that's when I hear her calling my name. Gypsy, help me.
Her daughter, Gypsy Blanchard, and her boyfriend are now jailed on first-degree murder.
Oh yes, Dee Dee's death was violent, says the journalist, then cuts to the fake-as-hell tears from Gypsy saying, "Her mom was crying out for her to help her." How can you even try to squeeze out fake tears that it was a sad thing when you were literally the one who masterminded the whole thing happening? You organized for your mom to be stabbed God knows how many times, and she's crying out for you, and now you're sad about it? Cry me a river.
I played a part in asking him to commit the murder. That is why I'm in prison. I've had 6 years to feel those emotions.
Played a part in asking him? Bitch, how can you play a part in asking him. You were the only one who asked him. And you gave him instructions and showed him what to do, literally right there, with your filmed psycho-esque stabbing motions. That's not you partly asking him to do something. That's you entirely and completely asking him, complete with literal video guide. And I'm sure we're all so glad that you've had 6 whole years to process it and now feel those emotions, whatever emotions they might be. Relief, happiness, regret. Well, I doubt that, but who am I to judge? I'm an asshole on the internet, not your shrink.
She never wanted me to find love or be happy. I'm sorry. But I am engaged. Today is the day before my parole hearing, and I will finally share my story the way that it should be shared.
No, you could never take my soul.
Well, first thing is, who would want that soul? I mean, it's pretty damn tainted. I go so far as to say it's completely rotten, but I digress. I'm out of the soul taking business for now. I always do like it, though, when someone says they're going to tell their story, because you know it's something that they think, feel, and believe in their own mind. How much similarity it actually bears to reality, though, is anybody's guess. Oh, as for that engagement, yeah, clearly destined to be a match made in heaven. Yes.
Your hair's getting longer.
I know. I didn't know how I was gonna wear it today, so.
I'll let you settle in.
Okay.
Good to see you.
And please get some flattering angles. I have gained some weight, so I have a little double chin going on.
I don't think you need to worry about unflattering angles. I mean, I'm not going to shame you for being a little bit chunky, but a double chin is the least of your concerns when you've got a double nose. I mean, my God, woman. That is one of the biggest beaks I have ever seen on any human being, never mind a woman. And apparently she's had a nose job, and all it did was smooth it out, but didn't do anything about size. Anyway, I'm getting lost on minor details. 7 years out of a 10-year sentence. Not too bad, really, for murder, assuming good behavior and eligibility for parole and all that. And I guess she would stand a pretty good chance of getting out, which, spoiler, we know she did. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the whole life after lockup thing now being broadcast with season 2 going to begin soon. But I don't really think that Gypsy needs to worry too much about those unflattering angles. I mean, her weight, double chin, in my opinion, aren't particularly significant. You know, like I said, she just looks like a frumpy 30-year-old housewife or something on a shoplifting charge. But I'm not sure there's any camera angle on the planet or in Earth's orbit that could do anything about that schnoz. Hell, that thing could serve as a sunshade for the Hubble telescope from Earth.
Well, ever since I came to prison, the end goal, the goal of everything that I have done within this facility was to get parole.
Well, generally, if you're given a sentence with the option for parole, then you'd have to be immensely stupid to be trying not to get it because you want to stay in for all those extra years when you could possibly be out in the big wide world living some semblance of a life. Though I guess most people don't usually leave prison and immediately walk into reality TV and a social media career that makes them bank. Now I can understand why our Gypsy here is particularly eager to get out. Whether she actually knows what's waiting for her outside is anybody's guess.
As I understand it, the parole board is going to ask me questions, certain questions about my crime.
That would seem to make sense, to ask you about the crime you've committed, how you've changed, what you've learned, any remorse, that kind of thing. Not that I would know personally, I've not been in that position before, but it seems logical to me, the ignorant, law-abiding, non-mother-murdering civilian.
I feel worried because there are things that the board will ask me, and I want to give genuine answers, but they might not particularly care for the fact that I will mention the abuse that I suffered at the hands of my mother.
What do you mean you want to give genuine answers, as opposed to what? That you want to, but will choose not to because you think it'll serve your purpose better to lie? But the abuse element, I think that's the sort of thing they'd expect you to come up with, and how your thinking was at the time, how it's changed since then, and then circle back around to whether you have any remorse or regrets. Because let's face it, you could have always just called the cops when your mom was asleep and, oh, I don't know, maybe walked to the door, let them in. Look, officer, no wheelchair. I guess planning that was far more complicated than seducing a mentally handicapped dude, planning your mom's murder, convincing him to do it, and then running away with him afterwards. See, that's one of those bullet points that I do know about.
Before you were in jail, have you ever heard the term Munchausen by proxy before?
No, I had never heard of Munchausen by proxy before. From a very young age, my mother had claimed that I had seizure disorders, hearing impairment. I was forced to use a wheelchair. As I got older, she started shaving my hair off and telling people that I had cancer. And with all these assumed illnesses, doctors is what I knew, hospitals is what I knew, surgeries is what I knew. There was no end in sight.
In fairness, you wouldn't expect a child to know medical or psychiatric terminology at the best of times, let alone one who's caught up in her mother's insanity. And while Munchausen's by proxy is more well known these days, at least in part because of Gypsy Rose's case, it still, hopefully at least, is a relatively rare disorder, and where a parent is demonstrating it, the chances are that they are going to extreme lengths to conceal and probably are changing addresses and doctors more than some people change their underwear. But there's no question that what was done to Gypsy is horrendous.
As far as we know, Gypsy Blanchard is the only documented case of a victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy who has killed their perpetrator to get out. That should tell all of us how desperate Gypsy was to escape her mother.
You wanna blow me a kiss? I love you.
Ooh, the nice creepy echo audio effect as mom says, I love you. Ooh, just the kind of thing to put chills up your spine. I wonder how many victims of Munchausen by proxy there are out there. But Gypsy's the only one who went to the extreme of murdering her mother. And just to reiterate this, not just murdering her mom in some spontaneous event, lashing out in anger or pain or something that required self-defense, a heat-of-the-moment act. No, she literally planned the entire thing out over days, if not weeks or even months, got a guy who was touched in the head himself to do it for her. Not something straightforward like, oh, she stood up in public and announced what was happening to her. Not she called the cops and showed them. No, she just plotted her mom's murder for a prolonged period of time and then got a mentally broken guy to do the deed for her. Yeah, victim, but at the same time, perp.
The Parole Board doesn't know me on a personal level. They just know what they've read about my case.
We have unearthed the appearance of a long financial fraud scheme along with this tragic event.
Deception down to Dee Dee and Gypsy's last name.
Her last name is not Blanchard, it's Blanchard with no E.
I'm going to feel pressure to give them what they want to hear. My mother taught me how to lie and manipulate, but that doesn't make me who I am, and I can learn to tell the truth. I'm just as flawed as the next person. I've made mistakes in my life, I've made bad choices, but once the Parole Board knows the things that they don't know, it'll make them understand a little bit better who I am and why I did what I did.
Well, I'd hope that the Parole Board does know about your case, that they've read about it in detail. Little things like court records, transcripts, case files, other evidence that was used back in the trial, so at least that they will be somewhat familiar with what happened. After that, by all means, convince them that you're no longer that person. But I do like that little additional comment that she slid in there, learn to tell the truth. You mean you haven't learned already? That's interesting.
When I first got arrested, I will admit that I had a lack of remorse. It wasn't until even years later that I began to miss my mother and began to understand that she's not coming back.
Do you think she loved you?
I think that she loved me in her own way. I think when she had me, she loved me. And I think as a child, she loved me. But I don't think that she too much cared for whenever I grow up.
I don't think anyone would expect much remorse from someone who had just plotted out the murder of their own parent and ran away from the crime scene with the person they'd groomed into carrying out the murder in question. And if she'd said at any point that she immediately felt remorse or did soon after the fact, I'd have had to challenge the honesty of that claim. Now, of course, years later, it's not unreasonable that some remorse might creep in, but is that really from regret over the action itself, or is it more down to the price that she's paying by spending her life locked up in prison? Because that might definitely feed some regrets that maybe if she'd taken one of those alternate paths, like, I don't know, telling someone or exposing the lies in public, that she'd have gotten away without murdering her mother and spending 7 years of her life in a cell. Or maybe that's just me being cynical.
I remember when Gypsy was 3 or 4 months old, Dee Dee told me she would stop breathing in her sleep. She had her tested and she has sleep apnea.
So it begins.
Oh, come on. Did you really expect me to put any other clip or quote there? Of course, there is the small possibility that maybe Gypsy had sleep apnea at 3 months old, but given everything that would follow, it's also a fairly safe bet that she didn't, and Mommy was just starting to go batshit crazy because her boy toy husband wasn't in love with her. Women. Crazy bitches.
My name is Claude Petrie. Dee Dee was my daughter, and Gypsy was my granddaughter. After she divorced Rod, Dee Dee moved back with us. And at night, Gypsy had a machine on. The alarm would come on when she stopped breathing. So you had to wake her up. Once you wake her up, the machine would stop. But it was scary.
Gypsy was 6 months old when I started dating her dad. And by the time Gypsy was around a year old, she had sleep apnea and then her eyesight, which she did have an extremely lazy eye.
Okay, so at this point, it seems like there were genuine medical and physical issues to be attended to, and hell, maybe the attention Mom got from those doctors and going to those appointments is what kickstarted the whole Munchausen by proxy into overdrive. After all, the obvious conditions were now diagnosed and being managed, so there's not much more that would need to be done about them. So then how do you fill that attention gap? Hope for more medical and physical misfortune to befall your child, and when that doesn't happen, or doesn't happen fast enough, make it happen! And yes, I'm aware it's bad form to laugh at a child with wonky eyes, and at an adult, absolutely. But I'm not a monster. I'm not gonna laugh at a baby with wonky eyes. If she still had them today, fair game. Kind of like that nose.
Okay, wow. Endocrine, neurology, ophthalmology, allergy, immunology. I've never seen any of this information. And I saw her a lot. I'm Dr. Rob Steele, and I became Gypsy's pediatrician back in 2005. She was 14 at the time, but Dee Dee never had or could show me any of Gypsy's previous medical records. If I had seen any of this earlier on, I just think a lot of things would have been different. I've only had a little opportunity to kind of run through them, but when I looked in her earlier medical records, Gypsy had strabismus as an infant, which is when one eye or both wander. And over time, you go blind. So you have to have surgery to correct the problem.
This is purely based on the overarching knowledge I think most people might have of this now, rather than at the time she was in this doctor's clinic. But again, maybe it's just me and my perception, but if a patient is showing up and I've never seen them before and there are no medical records then maybe a bit more in-depth investigation is required. All these extensive and complex conditions she has, and the records aren't there, they're missing, they're not available, what? And if the mother's saying they've moved, why doesn't she have a copy? Again, could just be me, but I've seen more than a few instances of parents or legal guardians keeping copies of medical records to hand precisely for the reason that they might need to go to hospital in an emergency and can't risk waiting on those records to be retrieved from the doctor's office. It smells of a, you should have done better, doctor, situation, but it never made it to any sort of malpractice or negligence stage. Probably because mommy didn't want that, and it was probably never going to happen once she was murdered, and the victim of the treatments was the one who murdered her.
When you look at Munchausen's by proxy, you often see that there was an encounter to address a real need with the child. But in doing so, Dee Dee gained attention from having a child that could go blind. That could have been the start of Dee Dee's Munchausen's by proxy.
Hey, exactly what I just said, and I've never seen this before. Yeah, okay, it was also incredibly obvious. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to reach that conclusion. But still, this is my first time popping my Gypsy cherry. Expect mess and occasional woohoo moments to follow. Okay? Give me a break.
As a child, I would spend a lot of time with my grandpa. And when I was like 5 years old, I remember getting into a motorcycle accident with him. And my mom turned it into a bigger event than it actually was. My knee and my leg got scraped. My leg was put in a brace.
Then one day, my mother walked into the room and she had a wheelchair with her. And very bluntly told me to use the wheelchair.
You scraped your knee and now you have to live in a wheelchair. I mean, sure, if you degloved a limb or shattered a bone or 5. And this is one of those circumstances where I'll never understand Munchausen's by proxy. In addition to not having any desire to subject my kids to random and wholly unnecessary medical procedures, just the idea of them being in a wheelchair would be such a massive inconvenience. Why in the bluest of frigid hells would I want to make that a thing voluntarily? I'm lazy and I don't want to be pushing a damn wheelchair around. Not so lazy that I wouldn't use one if it was absolutely necessary, but then I'd personally prefer to go around on crutches or something.
I didn't understand her reasonings, but I trusted her. She was my best friend, and I loved her, and I never questioned as a child. Now looking back on it, I wish that I stood up for myself more.
Oh, she has no idea how literally that could apply. Had she simply stood up for herself, and I mean literally and physically just got out of that chair when there were people around, then boom, mom's exposed. That's not to say mom, being the gaslighting, defrauding bitch that she is or was, wouldn't have been able to salvage the situation somehow and kept going with her scams and thirst for attention, perhaps in some new location. But still, you can wish you'd stood up for yourself, Gypsy, and it would have been the easiest thing to follow through on if you simply, literally just stood up around people.
Since walking into Chillicothe prison, I think my biggest changes as a person has been my maturity level. I thought everything was just fun, and I think that was part of experiencing more freedom than I ever had before. I understand how ironic that is, but from the time that I was born, my mother controlled everything I did.
Definitely ironic that 7 years in prison is considered freedom compared to a childhood with your mom. I'm not sure about the developing maturity level, though. Between mom's non-existent homeschooling and the years of infantilizing, Gypsy definitely has the demeanor of someone with a persistent childlike filter on her perception of things. I suppose some element of maturing has taken hold in terms of her knowledge and expression, but there's only so far that can take you. Her maturing in prison is still going to be limited to a controlled environment and not the real-world emotional and social development that most of us undergo, sometimes painfully. I say most of us because some people make it to middle age and are still living at home with their mom, spending their days sleeping or playing games in their bedrooms in the attic and crying about how they have no friends.
You will regret that. Period!
Maybe in some situations, a dose of Munchausen's by proxy might be a good thing, but I digress, and let's get back to this socially inept murderers.
My name is Bobby Petrie. My cousin is Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and my aunt was Dee Dee Blanchard. For Dee Dee, Gypsy getting into the wheelchair was a graduation from, like, wrapping her knee with a bandage for a basic scrape to let's see how far I could take this. And we all knew it was a bunch of bullshit, you know?
Well, if you all knew it was a bunch of BS, then why were you all just sitting back on your asses while it was taking place? I mean, this dude looks like he's, what, in his 40s, so probably 8 to 10 years older than her. Why weren't you calling it out at the time? You'd have been, like, what, your late teens, early 20s or something? It's not like you'd have been dismissed as a dumb kid. Color me unconvinced, but I get the feeling that Cuz here didn't give a rat's ass at the time, or at any point since, at least until he was invited to take part in the show and provide some insight into Gypsy's family life. Of course, that's just me going purely on first impressions and what I'm seeing here. I've not gone through, nor intend to go through, probably the dozens or hundreds of other documentaries out there. I'm just going through this and then on to the Life After Lockup one.
This one time we was having like a birthday party. All the kids was, jumping on the trampoline. And Gypsy said, "Can I go jump on the trampoline?" We said, "Sure." So she was jumping with all the other kids. But when her mom pulled up, she dropped like a wet rag. And it's like, what happened? She was screaming, "Don't you know she's crippled?" And I said, "We all seen different." Dee Dee pulled her off of the trampoline, put her in her wheelchair, and rolled her in the house for the rest of the day.
Bro, that's your niece, your sister's kid, who 1 second appears to behave perfectly normally around family and friends, then goes all weird and crippled when mom shows up. You see it, you know it, you realize it, but you do nothing about it. You just let it go. What kind of fucked up family is this? Oh, right. The kind where mom abuses and has her daughter medically mutilated to the point that daughter then goes and grooms some retarded guy she finds on the internet to murder mom on her behalf. Then she goes to prison, and when she comes out, the pity train pulls up at her station, swaps out the locomotive, and now the gravy train is about to roll out. A little bit of torture, a little bit of grooming, a dash of murder, and let's simmer in jail for half a dozen years, and voila! Lifetime shows and a career in reality television.
I grew up on this Disney fairy tale, love at first sight notion. I remember many times hoping for, like, a knight in shining armor to make me feel like I was special.
Yes, and when you found your knight in shining armor, what happened? Oh yeah, he slayed the dragon for you in kind of a metaphorical and a literal sense. In some ways, that could be considered romantic. I mean, in this way, of course, it basically involved following your precise instructions on how he should kill your mom. I don't remember that ending in a Disney fairy tale. Maybe we should wait for a reboot or two.
Since my incarceration, I am finally free to build relationships and friendships. The best memory that I have in my entire life is the day that I got to prison and I got to go out to the picnic tables. And I'm like, I'm free. I'm free to have friends. I'm free to do what I want. I might be in a controlled environment, but this is nice.
You're making me cry.
It's the truth. It's such a good memory.
Wow, how sad and pathetic. But I guess it's always a positive when you plead guilty to murder and sentenced to spend only a decade in prison. And you can be excited to get there because it's more freedom than you've ever had when you were living at home with your mother. And to get there, all you had to do was befriend a weirdo on the internet and groom him into committing a murder for you. Because, You couldn't stand up in front of people or speak out in front of people. I mean, come on. They do that every goddamn week for televangelists. Maybe that's where things went wrong. Nobody thought to call in a preacher who could lay hands on her head and say, walk, and then she just miraculously gets up as an act of God. No. There's a guy languishing in prison where he will stay for the rest of his natural life because you tricked him into killing your mother for you, and you're now out living your life while he rots. I hope that's covered in future episodes, because I really want to get into that one.
If I get paroled, when I leave this prison, I don't expect it to be easy. But I think that's part of the experience, is feeling the hard times, learning by trial and error. That's how I learn.
Well, that's encouraging that she's learned from trial and error, like a lot of us do. Fortunately, she only had the one abusive mother and the one internet retard she could call upon to kill her, so that should prevent a repeat of the situation, assuming that no one else falls into a similar role, like a husband, an ex-husband, a husband or boyfriend's ex, stepmother, or she becomes the ex herself and the husband finds someone else. There's a lot of variables to that, isn't there? But if anything goes wrong again in future involving someone in some way, shape, or form that hurts her, we could literally have a sequel. Potentially she could become Gypsy Rose Bunny Boiler.
Dee Dee called one day and said she was diagnosed with leukemia. Like, this poor girl. She has all of these illnesses and then has this.
Honestly, I really didn't know what cancer was. But I was going through so many medications and surgeries that I didn't question it.
Most of the family felt that it was not real. You know, it's kind of like the wheelchair. But then Dee Dee was shaving Gypsy's head and seeing that the medicine is making her hair fall out. So you really didn't know what was going on.
How stupid is this family? Not so much Gypsy's father's side, given that they were more distant and removed from the situation, though you'd think he might want to know every little detail about his supposedly seriously ill kid, but more so Dee Dee's side of the family, who were present, say they had doubts, and basically didn't believe Mom when she was claiming that Gypsy had all of these ailments. Yet they sat on their thumbs. You didn't believe the wheelchair was genuine, you don't believe the leukemia was genuine, but did nothing. The hell, no wonder that this kid wound up being abused for years and got to the point where she killed her mom. So yeah, basically you're all complicit in murder for being incompetent and retarded yourselves.
Munchausen by proxy perpetrators go to the ends of the earth to maintain the charade of having a sick child.
Yes, I'm sure they do, but apparently the family didn't believe it, so how convincing was she? So was it a massive achievement on her part, or a family who vacillated between complicity and ignorance of what was going on? Maybe running cons is just in the family DNA, and now the remnants are looking for sympathy from a TV audience. Here's a classic horse-bolted, barn door closed idea. Maybe your aunt, sister, daughter wouldn't have been killed off by her own child if you hadn't just sat around tickling your own prostate while she did what she did.
After looking at the medical records, apparently Dee Dee had suggested to different doctors that Gypsy was not getting enough calories to allow her to gain weight, meaning by mouth, which is just wild because all of that was a lie.
The documents that we saw, Gypsy, said that you have a fear of eating.
That's ridiculous. Is that something like my mom said?
Yes.
Wow, no, I never had a fear of eating.
Regardless of what Dee Dee said, it's a doctor's job to figure out what's real and what's not. And that was not done for Gypsy.
Wow, I'd never have guessed it's down to the doctors to figure out the facts of someone's ailments and the best course of treatment. Nice that he's on record saying it wasn't done in her case, which I presume he can do confidently because it wasn't his decision and he wasn't involved in that particular procedure. So yeah, it does get hard to advocate against her considering what was being done, the reaction that followed. But that pesky premeditation and detailed planning of a murder, as well as manipulating the dude with the mental disabilities to do it, That's still hard to look past, especially given she got 10 years and is now free, while he is still languishing in prison where he's going to stay until he dies. That's fair, right?
Gypsy and Dee Dee were in New Orleans, and they got in a car accident, and Dee Dee's foot was almost severed off. So while Dee Dee was recovering in the hospital, Dee Dee's dad, Claude, brought Gypsy home to go to Meadow.
When Dee Dee was in the hospital, I took care of Gypsy. She would eat with us at the table. Some French fries or anything we cooked. She didn't use no feeding machine. We played together. We took her to church and everything in the little wheelchair.
Oh my God, this entire family is retarded. How can you have your grandkid living with you for however long she did and not figure it out? Your daughter, her mother, has her fitted with a feeding tube, and yet she sat there chowing down dinner with the rest of you. It's almost a miracle this guy was able to raise his own kids. But then considering he didn't do anything at the time, nor did his other kids when his daughter went crazy, I guess being wacko has got to be down to genetics, at least in that family. Jesus.
Here in prison, I think I've only scratched the surface of realizing how much trauma I have been through, and accepting the fact that it did happen. I have taken a trauma therapy class. However, I'm not getting as much therapy as I would hope to have. Therapy is something that I find is essential to my betterment.
Well, that bodes well for the future. She hasn't had as much therapy as she'd like and thinks it's essential. I'm glad to hear she's at least aware of that, but just a tiny little bit concerned that she's not getting what she thinks she needs. Wow. Good old U.S. healthcare. Awesome.
I was being sexually abused, molested. My grandpa would take me out of my wheelchair and bring me into a closet or the shack that was back behind their house, where he would do woodworking and he would perform sexual acts on me.
Well, that just got a whole lot darker.
At 9, I don't think that I knew that it was wrong. But then my grandfather told me not to tell anyone. He's like, you don't want Papa to go to jail, do you?
Oh, and now Grandpa is showing up in a whole different light. I don't know. Do I believe her? Do I not believe her? It's kind of hard to say. She does have a history of lying, and it's not exactly the kind of story which is original, kind of thing you would hear from many sources. I don't know.
Gypsy and I were on the phone, and she said, my grandfather, Claude, molested me. And I wanted to fall out my chair to take the innocence away from a child. It's horrible.
Christy has been the mom that I always wanted to have, and honestly, I can't imagine my life without her now, because she's just been that supportive.
The abuse was not something that I wanted to come forward with publicly, because I just wasn't ready for that. But I feel like releasing all of that out would be very therapeutic for me.
Did it happen? Did it not? Who knows? I guess the default position is always to believe the alleged victim, or at least give them the benefit of the doubt. But after years in prison, having heard similar stories of abuse and molestation from other inmates, I guess, has she taken those on board herself to garner extra sympathy for her case? I mean, I don't know. This is my first time watching this, so don't spoil it for me for future installments if it turns out that she is telling the truth. I just kind of have my doubts that it's something that only seems to come out with journalists in a documentary that's going to be presented to the public and, makes her out to be even more of a victim than she already is. I mean, I admit that part of me hopes she's lying because it makes her easier to dislike, and for bonus legitimate reasons to dislike her, and not just because of the whole premeditated murder of her mother and grooming a retard to commit the act and condemning him to a life in prison.
Gypsy told us that there may have been some abuse that went on in this house.
Abuse with who?
With you.
Who?
Gypsy.
Gypsy?
Yeah.
Oh, no. No, I never. At the first I heard of it, we always would play together and always stuff together and stuff like that, but
So that's not true at all.
no,
Why do you think Gypsy would say that if it's...
I don't know. I don't know, baby. She would try to touch me. I said, no, don't do that. She was the one that was trying to touch me. I said, no, don't do that. When she started that when she was about 4 years old. I said, don't do that. And that's about it. But she was trying to touch me.
And with that, I'm almost convinced of her story now. It's not the reaction I'd expect from a guy being told his granddaughter is accusing him of molesting her. Calm, first he heard of it, and then saying that, no, it wasn't him, that she was trying to touch him when she was 4 years old. That all sounds so wrong on so many levels. In fact, I'm sure I've heard similar excuses from pedos and their advocates trying to claim that kids initiate that shit. Bollocks, you dirty old man.
No, I don't think that happened. I think that was just probably taught to her by her mom for her attention, to throw the spotlight on somebody else besides her.
There is no part of me that questions if this happened or not. This 100% happened. And he could take it to his grave if he wants to, but the one person that is not going to visit him at his grave is me.
I mean, still, none the wiser, really. Is Uncle telling the truth as best he knows? Is he correct? And her mom primed her with that information for an additional sympathy grift? Who the hell knows? There's no evidence, one way or another, and while lie detectors might be interesting for curiosity's sake, they're still not proof of anything, otherwise they'd be completely accurate and admissible in court. So I guess it depends on who you believe more, but given Grandpa's reaction, I'm inclined to give Gypsy the benefit of the doubt. It's mostly down to that reaction and that weird, unsolicited claim that at 4 years old, Gypsy was trying to touch him. That stinks like week-old tuna. That doesn't sound right at all.
People come in here and inquire about Gypsy, what's going on with her and when she's getting out, because a lot of people are on her side. A lot of people feel like, she was wrongly done by her mom, and I definitely feel that, 100%. Gypsy got robbed her whole life by the one person she looked up to. It was like the movie Mommy Dearest to the max. Mommy Dearest was sick, but Dee Dee was sicker. About a year after my grandmother died, my grandfather got married to Laura Mae. Dee Dee was very upset about that happening. She felt like my grandmother was being replaced. One day, my grandfather and Gypsy were hanging out, and Gypsy sees the Roundup in the corner, and she tells my grandfather, oh, that's the vitamins that Mom gives to Grandma Laura Mae.
Gypsy told me when I'd go working, Dee would cook and put Roundup in Laura's food. Roundup kills grasses, but if you take enough, it'll kill you. It'll eat up all your stomach.
So the cousin who sat back and did nothing and said nothing while shit was going down when Gypsy was a kid, believes her, supports her, pretty much stating the obvious, and in the court of public opinion, yes, Gypsy was fully entitled to do what she did. He's 100% on her side. Yeah, people love a hard luck story, especially where the victim fights back against the bully. He's right that she got robbed of her childhood by her mother. I mean, shit, teeth pulled, salivary glands removed among the many procedures. So yeah, no one should ever have to endure that. And just throwing an added story about Dee Dee, the mom, trying to poison the step-grandma because she hates that her father remarried. What a charming, charming family. And it does help to further paint Dee Dee as being this evil, rightly evil bitch that she was and deserved death.
I know that my mother had this hatred towards Laura. So that is something that would be in her character. Laura was just like, I don't want you here. And my mother's like, fine. I was so happy. I had been asking my mother over and over again to leave my grandpa's house. Desperate to get away from my grandpa and the abuse that was going on. Let's just go anywhere but here. Let's just go. But by exiling us from our family, it just gave her free rein to create new illnesses for me, have me put on more medications, and make things worse.
And some confirmation from Gypsy that her mom hated her grandpa's new wife and was trying to kill her was something that Gypsy would expect her mom to do. But because of this apparent molestation by her grandfather, which again, I'm inclined to believe her now because of that weird comment that he made about her trying to touch him at 4 years old, she was happy to get out of there, only for it to backfire and wind up completely under her mother's tender, loving care. Talk about frying pan and fire. God damn.
Laura May ended up dying a slow, painful death. And I guarantee you it had a lot to do with the poisoning from that Roundup.
And when we thought we heard it all, we didn't.
Well, this is playing out like a damn soap opera now. So step-grandma does die somewhere along the line that may or may not have been partly or entirely caused by poisoning from Dee Dee. I mean, we already knew that she pretty much deserves to be dead like 50 times over. But it's also nice to have just that little bit extra reinforcement and weight added to the justice scales in favor of, ha! You're dead, and you deserve it.
Maybe Gypsy wasn't as childlike or innocent as we thought she was.
Gypsy's case was literally like peeling the scariest onion you'll ever find.
First time I tried to run away, she chained me to the bed and said that you will never find love. You will never be happy. I'm sorry.
Gypsy was just trying to escape the devil.
I pulled the trigger as many times as I could.
I wish she could have come to me.
Every time that I would take these pills, all my problems went away.
We should all feel that we failed Gypsy.
We are leaving right now for Gypsy's parole hearing.
I have been keeping a secret. I am engaged.
I didn't realize writing wedding vows would be so difficult.
I think that there is a possibility of a happy ending for me.
Ooh, lots to come in future episodes. Okay, I get that a lot of you might have seen these shows and know more about this than I do, but hey, let me have my fun. I haven't seen these and barely paid attention to this squeaky voice bitch with a huge beak, so my knowledge is surface level only. But I enjoyed that. It was fun, and there's still lots more to go through. But since this was my first go-through on this, and I thought there was a lot of, relevant and interesting stuff for this particular installment, maybe in the future I'll combine more episodes into a single reaction. I guess it just depends on how much is in there that I can run my mouth about. And I can run my mouth on plenty of things, with opinions that are likely to piss someone off in some way or another, but not too many someone's, I hope. Anyway, that'll do me for now. I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode, and if so, drop a like down below, add a comment, even if it's just to say hello, or share your insights and what you think. I'm interested in what you have to say, just please no spoilers. And lastly, you can also catch me live almost every Friday night over on my main channel at Hatman, link in the description, or Hatz on Rumble, where anything goes. But it's not for the faint of heart. I hope I'll see you back here or there next time. Until then, take care, have fun, live life, and don't murder anybody. Or, at the very least, don't get caught. I'm out. See ya.